Good afternoon and welcome to the last in our series of YouTube presentations from the Token Creek Chamber Music Festival. The composer today is with us, pictured to my right, and he's always been with us as really our primary guest in our festival. The music we played most often in the most guises, only some of which will be represented today and on our previous Bach concert. That concert was mostly larger scale compositions, concerti, public pieces. This is chamber music, sometimes of the most intimate and personal kind, particularly starting with a piece called The Art of the Fugue, a series of 14, and actually more than 14, some are doubled up, fugues on one subject, a subject which is clearly very fertile for the composer. It is not really an unusual tune. In fact, it is as much a kind of prototype for fugue composition as a spectacularly memorable thing in itself. But it is for the composer an obvious sense of at-homeness, ability to make amazing, magical, unusual things happen with endless invention as the cycle goes on. In my own work through the cycle, I've reached now about number 11, and I'm pushing forward a little bit to 14 just to get a sense of where it's going to wind up, with the increasing conviction that they are keyboard pieces that as a finger can be found for every note. They're not comfortable to play, and people who played other Bach fugues, including my dear friend Craig Smith, when he launched Opus, the first one for his great series at Emmanuel, where we played them all, looked up from the piano and said, "This is new territory." It is. It's not, if you've played the well-tempered clavichord, your first encounter with one of the Art of the Fugue pieces will be sort of a shock. In any case, the little recital here begins with a group of them, and I was, in studying these pieces myself, reminded very often of a remark by Charles Rosen, that the audience for fugue, I think he might have been speaking of these fugues, but really all fugues, is one. I wasn't quite sure when I read that statement whether he meant the player or the player plus one. Either is right. That is much more, and they're swimming in water in which they're not really accustomed to function. The single listener, either the player or the one comrade, is the candidate for these pieces because they are so intimately expressed vocally and melodically, and they so much rely on experience of each other, that is to say, within the piece, but also piece to piece. It's a journey which I think we are meant to take. And if we can take it with our fingers, even if the notes are going to fight back, we should do it. So I hope that for those of you who are players, if you have not brought these pieces out onto your music lyre, your piano, you will. You'll hear me sometimes in a desperate struggle with where the fingers are not used to going. But as you experience it yourself, you will find in the music some realms that you've never found even in Bach before. They are as expressive of his inner world, of where he was going at that later part of his life, of the kind of range of thought that he'd arrived in that is really above and beyond anything he wrote, except for certain of the very large concerted pieces, which we hear very rarely fully assembled. They are another piece of terrain, of Bach terrain. Mostly from earlier times come our set of chorale preludes, which are arrangements of the kind that are not inharmonious with Bach's enterprise. After all, he arranged things so often in the course of his own career for combinations other than the original ideas. In this case, we take organ pieces and assign the chorale to the oboe to differentiate it, and give the other pieces to the string players. When Bach's listeners heard these pieces, they attached to the chorale, that is, to the music the oboe is playing, words that they knew from singing them in church as hymn tunes. And these words added very much to the significance and the intent of these pieces. That is to say, they made very specific meanings out of these pieces. So what you are hearing is something a little bit missing in the message of the piece, though they remain very, very beautiful as organ pieces. One of the things we've lost in receiving Bach's music is the immediacy of the chorale. That is the sense that they were as familiar to Bach's listeners as the top of top 40 today, as the most played rock hit. Everyone who came to church had sung those songs previously in many, many Sundays, and they were in their ears. And they are used as a kind of guide, a spiritual and musical guide through textures which would be much too challenging, you would think, for listeners to navigate without them. They're what we call in modern parlance, in the songwriting world, they're a hook. They lead listeners who might otherwise find the surrounding territory baffling through in confidence and in satisfaction that they are navigating terrain which is incredibly satisfying, rich commentary on these beautiful songs that they've grown up with. So that's the sense of these chorale preludes in their original setting. And as we hear them today, I think what we hear is, in arrangements like this, a somewhat more expressive delivery of the line, or conventionally so, because the string players can make their line color get stronger, weaker, can engage with certain moments in the way that the more objective sound of the organ will not. In any idiom, these are really beautiful pieces, and some of them are extracted from chorales, some of them are extracted from organ series themselves. We have done a number of complete cantatas at Token Creek, I think 8 or 9 of them. We're not representing them in this concert, but we are going to be presenting a number of arias. Arias, away from their cantatas, are a little harder to grasp, and you receive them in this sort of sense here in this little concert more as beautiful pieces of music rather than as stations in a journey, as they always are within a cantata. Within a cantata, they mark out certain functions in the drama of the piece. The soul is at a stage of confusion, or the soul is reaching a stage of enlightenment, or the soul has created a terrible mess in their lives and they need rescue, and the aria brings some of that. Here, we just listen to them as a series of pieces whose function has been somewhat stripped from them, and they remain magnificent compositions on their own. Closing with the musical offering, we're again in interesting terrain because the actual performance sequence of the pieces was not decided by Bach. He went up, biggest trip of his life, to visit his son at the court of Frederick the Great, and the furthest he ever went away from home to near Berlin and Potsdam. And a number of things were expected of him on this trip. He was going to examine the first models of the modern piano And you may have noticed all the way through our Bach performances, this one and the previous one, and throughout our festival, the piano played a vigorous role in our Bach performances. We felt that we were historically super accurate in our confidence of the piano, since Bach was yearning for it, promoting it, and helping to design the piano all through his career. So the piano is a big deal in Bach's trip to Potsdam. He's examining new pianos. He is asked at certain points to improvise for the very distinguished throng assembled, led by his son, Philip Emanuel, who's the court composer there. And in the first case, he improvises a 3-part fugue, difficult enough, and the transcription he makes of that inspiration, of that improvisation, when he gets home, it is an inspiration, in fact, is one of the wildest accounts of him playing live that we have. It has a few passages where you think this guy has just tripped out, and he somehow remembered how he did it, and he wrote it down when he got home. We're lucky to have any accounts of composers improvising that we do have, and this is one of the most precious ones, the 3-part Ricercar from the musical offering that you will hear there. He's also asked to improvise a 6-voice fugue, and he's never written one. And he demurs, he says, no thanks, not today. I think it was a little bit something to embarrass him at the time. There could have been a little bit of rivalry with his son. There could have been just a sort of, let's put it to the old guy and see what he really is up for here. But instead, he went home and he wrote one. And it is also an amazing piece, but not improvisational at all. It is a sovereign way of showing that he can control this really overabundance of voices with clarity and beauty and with soul and with absolute abundance of inspiration. And it is spoken of now, I think, in a very enlightened way, as the first piano piece, the first piece that could be played by this new instrument and is best played by this new instrument, the pianoforte. So in our performance, that occurs in its place in the sequence. However, the last interesting thing I wish to mention about this concert is that we don't know what order the movements were supposed to be played in the musical offering. Bach, I think, very purposely made a puzzle out of this by sending out the piece published in 3 bundles. And the way you order the bundles is the way you choose to present the piece. That is, you can do the math and find that there is certainly more than one way that the piece can be rolled out in a sequence. We chose one. Anyone can choose the sequence. And the reaction to the piece, we don't know much about, except that Bach writes a kind of laudatory and gracious bunch of remarks to Frederick the Great, who supposedly dictated him the theme for the whole thing. Another seditious theory that one should really advance at this point is that Frederick the Great was not the author of the theme of the musical offering, that it is probably the son, Philip Emanuel Bach, who would have the compositional canniness and sophistication and sheer cussedness to come up with a theme that is so difficult to solve in the situations in which Bach wants to place it here. A great deal of the piece, the musical offering, is written with canons, that is to say, with one voice literally following another voice at a time interval. This is a bit of a challenge, a courageous and somewhat bluff challenge at the fanciful, forward-looking court he's just visited, because canon was the symbol to them and to Bach of an older style, of a style that speaks of eternity in the sense that once you start the canon in principle, it could go on forever. Obviously, the composer decides to stop it at certain points, but I think Bach, as an older composer, somewhat under challenge by this time in his career because his style was becoming a little bit recondite and old-fashioned, is in the musical offering very, in a very rambunctious and self-confident way, expressing the fact that his old values are producing the newest music they could possibly be hearing at that moment. Music so fresh that as we hear it now, it's almost too new to comprehend. So I hope you will enjoy listening to this collection of various sides of Bach's music. And I would like to mention to you that there will be a surprise encore presentation after the last of these concerts, which is this one. So tune back in for an encore surprise as we bid you farewell from this marathon journey. Thank you.